How many of you believe in conspiracy theories? Anyone? Like the conspiracy theory, like that we're living in a computer-generated dream world, that we're just batteries somewhere in some elaborate scheme, kind of like The Matrix. Anyone seen The Matrix? Kind of like that? Anyone? No? Am I the only one that's seen The Matrix? No, that's all right. Yeah, conspiracy theories. I started thinking about that this week in light of what we're going to be talking about. And one of the conspiracy theories that kind of was brought to my mind was one that involves a certain team. And many of you know that the New England Patriots, that's one of their older logos, if those of you that don't recognize it. They won the Super Bowl this past season, right? And we're all very happy and excited about that. We think all right, we'll work on Brian. It's okay, Brian. Don't worry about it. What's your team, by the way? Yeah, I don't know about that. We'll talk about that. And it's interesting that you bring up the cheating part of that. Like many of us know that at the end of the season, when you have the Super Bowl or the NBA Finals or the World Series or the Stanley Cup, it's one of the hardest times for an organization is what's called the off season. Generally speaking, they don't have a ton of revenue coming in because they generally don't have a lot of people coming to the stadium because there's no sports games going on, unless you're in a large metropolitan area where you can use the building for a number of different concerts and events and stuff like that. But most of them don't have those things. So right now we're in the off season of three major sports: of hockey, of basketball, and of football. I mean, you can kind of debate whether we're not in football, but those are the three ones that we're in the off-season of. It's very challenging because they don't have a lot of revenue coming in. And one of the things that happened this almost off-season was something called Deflategate. Everyone remember Deflategate? It's not Watergate, which I'm sure some of you know what that was, and it's not Spygate, which is when allegedly the Patriots used video cameras to videotape the opposing team, their plays and stuff like that. There's something called Deflategate, which happened the conference finals between the Colts and the Patriots. And what happened was the Patriots they allegedly let out, and I need to use the word allegedly because we don't know for certain, allegedly let out some of the air from the football so that they were easier to throw, which is against the rules and you can get in trouble for that kind of thing. But it's all a big conspiracy. No one really knows if it's actually, happened or not. But I'm almost convinced that the NFL allowed this to happen, almost wanted it to happen, exactly at the time that it happened, so that we would be talking about this during what's called the off-season, and so they would kind of know that the NFL at least was in people's minds, because if this conspiracy wasn't going on, no one would really have football on their minds. Those of us that kind of loosely follow it from time to time, which I loosely follow it during the off-season, but it's been kind of in my face a lot on ESPN, my ESPN app, and other sports outlets. It's been kind of impressed on all of us that are kind of in that realm to think about football more than we normally would because of this conspiracy. And I'm almost convinced that the NFL wants to send a message every single offseason to us to remember us, remember football. Think about us while we're in the offseason, while we don't have games and we're not talking about, you're not watching it every single Sunday and you're not, getting the updates on who's injured and things of that nature during the week and then leading up to the 2 days before when they come up with this report and that report. That doesn't happen during the offseason. And I'm almost convinced that the NFL, and I'm almost convinced it might happen in other sports, but it seems very prevalent here, that the NFL wants to make sure that it has a message of, here we are, this is where we are, this is, just kind of making sure that we know that the NFL still exists, so that maybe, just maybe, we might buy more merchandise, or we might be lured into reading up on their thing, so we might buy a subscription, or maybe we'll, think more about attending a game or something like that. And it seems to be, regardless of the story, whether it's a feel-good story, which there are certainly many good stories out there in the NFL, and in other sports. There are good stories about the NFL, players in the NFL going into communities, helping out impoverished areas, doing a lot of work in inner cities with the kids that have literally nothing, and doing amazing things. Then the NFL plays on those stories an awful lot. It also plays on the stories of bad things and cheating and all the other issues of players getting into legal troubles and stuff like that just to kind of make sure that we know that this massive enterprise is still out there during the off season, that they're still around. And as long as the message of football or the idea of football is being talked about, the NFL brass, the people up at the top, the people that make, I think Roger Goodell, who's the commissioner, made like over $10, $12 million, for the year, just kind of being there, doing whatever he does, which doesn't seem to be a lot, that it's a good thing that we're talking about the NFL, that we're talking about sports, And as long as they have a message out there, as long as they know that we are thinking about them, it's a good thing for them. What's interesting is that Paul, here in the first chapter of Philippians, is kind of in a similar situation. He's kind of in a similar situation in the middle of 1 Philippians. So if you would, turn with me to Philippians chapter 1. We're going to be continuing our series called Be Happy. And hopefully you're being happy. Hopefully happiness has come to you. We're going to be in Philippians 1, verses 12 through 18. Would you stand with me in honor of God's word? Brothers and sisters, I want you to know that the things that have happened to me have actually advanced the gospel. The whole Praetorian Guard and everyone else knows that I am in prison for Christ. Most of the brothers and sisters have had more confidence through the Lord to speak the word boldly and bravely because of my jail time. Some certainly preach Christ with jealous and competitive motives, but others preach with good motives. They are motivated by love because they know that I'm put here to give a defense of the gospel. The others preach Christ because of their selfish ambition. They are insincere, hoping to cause me more pain while I am in prison. What do you think about, I left this part off, but what do you think about this? Just this, since Christ is proclaimed in every possible way, whether from dishonest or true motives, I am glad, and I'll continue to be glad. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. You may be seated. One of the most amazing stories in the Bible, and really one of the most amazing stories of all ancient literature, is a story that was put on Broadway. It's a story that has been, they made a CD out of it, they made a musical out of it and everything. The story of Joseph. This story of Joseph, for our family, for some reason, has really been one of those really awesome stories. Susan likes to listen to the story of the amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat with Emily, and she dances in her room and stuff like that. And Luke really likes it. He doesn't really dance, he just kind of like bops up and down his head a bunch of times and stuff like that. And we really enjoy listening to the story of Joseph and talking about it. And if you would like, it's located in Genesis chapter 30. So if you want to flip over there, we're not going to be going through all of it, but it starts out in Genesis 30 with the birth of Joseph. And it goes 20 chapters about one guy, essentially, about the story of Joseph. And it goes all the way through the rest of Genesis. And, we all kind of know the story of Joseph. He's born. He kind of grows up a little bit. He gets this amazing coat of many colors, kind of being put up on a pedestal in a way in front of his brothers, that he's kind of like the loved one, the one that is kind of liked the most maybe by his father, the one that is loved most by his father. And, as the oldest in my family, that would be challenging for me. How many of you are the oldest in your family? Would that be challenging for you to know that maybe the youngest or even the middle child would be the one that's kind of elevated above you? That'd be really tough. That'd be very, very difficult for me. That he's favored by his father over his brothers, and they despise him for it. They're so frustrated about that. They just can't stand it. And he has dreams where his brothers bow down to him, and he, interprets dreams and tells them about it. And that's even worse. Add fuel to the fire, right? Can't deal with it. And he has this place above his brothers. And I can relate to him. Not him. I can relate to the brothers. I can relate to them in such a big way because every time when it was my brother's birthday, my parents would say it was the best day and worst day of the year. Because it was the worst day for me, because I couldn't stand that my brother was getting special attention. My brother got to have friends over the house. And the focus was on my brother. And my brother and I have a pretty good relationship now. We're 2.5 years apart. I'm older. I'm 33 for the time being, and he's 31. And we have a pretty good relationship now. But back when we were kids, I could not stand when he had a birthday. I mean, there's home videos, and I wanted to find them, and then I thought to myself, well, maybe people would like judge me and think that I'm like really mean and evil. So I didn't want to put them up and play them for everyone. But there are pictures and video of me scowling on the couch, watching him open a present, and his friends are kind of there. And I would do everything that I could to make his life miserable, and my parents could not stand it. I mean, it was just, any parents been there with their kids being like that? Yeah, Susan, we're there. I mean, for some reason, April and May, which is when Emily and Kyle's birthday is, it is tough those days. It's very difficult. And I would get so frustrated that he was getting all that attention. And Joseph's brothers were so frustrated at him, they eventually sold him into slavery, convinced their father that Joseph had been eaten by wild animals and it was dead. Now, my brother's still around, and I never went that far, to that degree with my brother to do something like that. The thought had crossed my mind, but I never went to that extreme that the brothers did with Joseph. I mean, like crazy, crazy stuff. And many of us kind of know what happened next. Joseph gets sold to the Egyptians, and more specifically to Potiphar. Joseph, works his way kind of up there, does really good things. God blesses him, works his way up there, and he becomes in charge of all of Potiphar's household. That's a pretty big deal, right? Pretty big deal for him, going from in the bottom of a pit to this place in his life. However, Joseph was tempted to go be with Potiphar, we'll just put it that way, and he resisted. He didn't want any part of it. He didn't want to go with her, and she got angry, and so she made claims, and she got really mad, and said that she, essentially that he tried to take advantage of her. Potiphar went ballistic and threw him in prison. And now he's in prison. Now he's back in the pit again. And in prison, he actually kind of worked his way up in prison, which is kind of odd, I thought, to be in charge of most of the things that happened in the prison. He kind of worked his way up there. One day there was a cupbearer and a baker, and we kind of know that story. He interpreted their dreams, and through the course of a few events, he had the opportunity to interpret Pharaoh's dream. This is a big deal. And after he interpreted Pharaoh's dream, Pharaoh made him second in command. He made him in charge of storing all the food and provisions and things of that nature for the upcoming famines that were going to be happening. And Joseph, we're going to fast forward a little bit. Joseph's brothers come to Egypt for food. They hear that Egypt has food, and they don't, and so they go to Egypt. And Joseph kind of, messes with them a little bit, kind of plays with them a little bit, pretending to be hard on them, and then eventually, through the course of a few events, and it's located right there in Genesis, that he reveals himself to them and shares with them who he is. And he told them that everything was going to be all right. And he sent for his father and the entire household to live with them in Egypt. Okay? So we're all in good, happy times right now. And this is a good thing. However, Joseph's father eventually dies. And now we come to yet another pinnacle part, which I think is overlooked to some degree, a pinnacle part in Joseph's life. What does he do with his brothers? Because now he really doesn't have to worry about being nice to them because his father's not there anymore. So he can kind of do what he wants to them. As the younger brother, he remembers what they had done to him. I'm sure that he must have, It hadn't been like hundreds and hundreds of years. He knows what they had done to him. He knows that they threw him in a pit, hated him, sold him to slavery, right? He could have taken revenge. What does he do? What he does is contrary to what I would say what most of our society says to do. Our society would say, get back, get even, get back at them, make them worse off than you were, or at least get even so that we're kind of, they know what you went through. And I can see where they would come from with that. However, in Genesis 50, 18 through 20, we come to this pinnacle point. His brothers then came and threw themselves down before him, we are your slaves. They're realizing this. Oh no, we're going to be in trouble here. Joseph said to them, because they're afraid, right? They're afraid that Joseph's going to have them executed, whacked, tossed out. It's going to be a bad, bad deal for them. So they're like, we're just going to be your slaves, they said. Joseph said to them, don't be afraid. Am I in the place of God? You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done in the saving of many lives. What amazing, amazing thing that Joseph said to them. To have that mentality, to be in a tight relationship with God where you can forgive and say those things. Don't worry about it. You intended harm to come to me, but God intended it for good. And Paul seems to have something of the same type of confidence in God's power, even when things seem to be going in the wrong direction. I mean, we know that he's in prison, most likely in Ephesus. He's in prison while writing this letter. And things are kind of going not the way that he thought that they were going to go. This was the attitude that Joseph had all of his life. And in all the ups and downs, we talked about them, we just talked about the ups and downs, a roller coaster ride that he kind of went through. Having much, having nothing, having much, having nothing. And all the while, he would say, God meant it for good towards the situations, and specifically towards the situation that he was in with his brother. And Paul seems to have something of the same confidence in God's power in knowing that things are seemingly in the wrong direction, that and trying to have this attitude and have this attitude when you're in tough and difficult situations, really, really struggling with what is going on. And Paul knows this story, which happened, and Paul, of course, knows of a story which happened more recently, very recently. I mean, the story of Joseph happened a long, long time before Paul was even thought of. And the story that happened just more recently, which is where the Jews had falsely accused this man, suffered at the hands of wicked people, was crucified, and through the resurrection that God meant it for good. The story presents us with that the Jews would find, that they would find strange that God produces good out of evil. The Jews didn't quite grasp that God would produce good out of evil. And this is what Paul believes and isn't afraid to share it and to show it, that God produces good and can produce good out of evil. And we need to remember that Paul is just a mere human, right? He's just like us. He's just, flesh and bones. He's a spiritual being just like we are. And he has feelings and emotions and concerns just like we do. And Paul is in this situation in prison, and he's left with these two kind of big key issues that he's dealing with. Within himself, sitting, probably chained to a wall, sitting in prison, chained to the floor, sitting in prison, and he's dealing with two major issues. We want to kind of unpack those a little bit here in the next few moments. The first issue, I'd like to use a sermon illustration, which is the book called One Stuck Duck. Has anybody ever read the book One Stuck Duck? I have the book here. Mine doesn't look as nice as that one because Luke got a hold of it and tore the cover off of it. And what I wanted to do was, I was hoping to have, Luke, hey kids, you want to come sit down up here, and we're going to read the book One Stuck Duck, and everyone can kind of listen in as we read this book together with the kids. So Kyle and Emily and Luke, and is your kid here? Is he around? He's on the floor. Okay. Hey guys, why don't you come over? We're going to read One Stuck Duck, okay? Can you sit down? Yeah, one duck. One stuck duck. You guys can just kind of eavesdrop in on this, okay? We're going to talk about this. Hey guys, all right. One stuck duck. Yeah, one stuck duck. Yeah, one duck. Ready? Help. Who can help? Now, I was going to try to find all these pictures and put them up there, but that was going to be really difficult. Yeah, the page is missing. Oh, it's part of the story. Oh, sorry. I got to start over. Sorry. Down by the marsh, by the sleepy, slimy marsh, one duck gets stuck in the muck. Down by the deep green marsh. Right? Oh, sorry. Which other one? I did. Yep, help, right? Help. Who can help? Who can help? Two fish splish to the duck. Yep, two fish splish to the duck. No luck, still stuck. No. 3 moose, clump, clump to the duck. No luck, still stuck. 4 crickets, pleep to the duck. No luck, still stuck. Yep, still stuck. 5 frogs, plop to the duck. No luck, still stuck. 6 skunks, ew, skunks, plunk to the duck. No luck, still stuck. 7 snails, slush, slush to the duck. No luck, still stuck. 8 possums, slosh to the duck. No luck, still stuck. 9 snakes, slink to the duck. No luck, still stuck. 10 dragonflies, sling to the duck. No luck, still stuck. Help, help, who can help? And what's really fun is that we get to this point in this book where we've had 10, and really they're not 10, but we've gone through all 10 different situations where this duck has tried to get help from an individual group. Okay? Which I think is really kind of interesting. And then we get to this great part of the book. It says, we can, and every single animal group, they all help the duck who got stuck in the muck. And then what happens? Spluck. Thanks, said the duck who got out of the muck down by the deep green marsh. Right? Isn't that great? Good job. And what's really fun, I think, about this book, you did a great job, kids. I know, we finished the book. Sorry, dude. One of the really cool things about this book is that the idea of community, and that's what I got. I've read this book a bunch of times, and then at the beginning of the week, when I was doing some reading in the text, and I started reading some other books and trying to really sink myself into this text here, I ended up reading this book just by chance, and I could see that it was really fun that all of these animals came together in community to help the one stuck duck who was stuck, being stuck in the muck, right? Sometimes we get stuck. Sometimes we get stuck in ministry. Sometimes we get stuck in life situations. Sometimes we get stuck in community, and the community can come in and help, and to surround and gather, and to help us get unstuck from the muck. And Paul is in a very similar situation. He's stuck in jail, right? The duck couldn't go anywhere, and Paul is stuck in jail. And for an evangelist like Paul, for someone whose job, who's been called by God to go out and to preach his good news, must have been driving him insane. I mean, I can kind of understand this to some degree. When I was at District Assembly and they're getting ready to have a speaker go up and preacher or whatever, and we had just come through worship and singing together, and I thought, I want to say something. I want to get up and start preaching, but I couldn't because it wasn't my turn. And so I kind of get it, kind of understand it to some degree that it's of what Paul's going through. He's stuck in prison, and he couldn't go anywhere. Think of a time where you had been stuck. Think of a time where you had an idea, or you were setting out to do something, and for whatever reason, it just didn't happen. You got stuck in the situation that you're in. Maybe the task was more difficult than you had realized. There have been, I wouldn't say many times, but there have been definite times in my life where I've gotten stuck, where I've gotten frustrated, and I was just really struggling, and I didn't see or think that I would be able to get out of it, or really that I would be able to go on with that situation. And it almost felt like there was no purpose for that situation that I was in. Thank goodness Susan isn't here, because if she saw this slide up, she'd go ballistic. I recently bought, I guess it would be maybe 3 or 4 years ago at this point, I wanted to get a camper for our family. And so I went online and I found this camper for our family, and I thought that I could fix it up and it'd be really great. And this is really close to what it looked like. I mean, I typed in camper and I found all these beautiful ones, and I was like, hey, I got to find something that looks really close to what I tried to purchase. This is almost exactly what I got for $100, right? And you get what you pay for, that kind of thing. But I knew that I could fix it up. I could gut the floor, I could gut the stuff, and make it all nice on the inside and whatever. That didn't end up happening as the way that I thought. Some of the issues with it were more than I was going to be able to handle. And so I was like, you know what? I'm just going to let it sit in the driveway, and I'm going to sell it. So I went on a community website, and I typed in, and I said, I would like a free camper. Figuring that if I got a free one, I wouldn't have to invest in the money that I invested into it would only be into it and not necessarily paying someone else for it. Well, lo and behold, someone gave me a camper for free. That was a lot newer than this one, but had some major issues. I needed to gut the floor. It had a hole in the ceiling and a whole bunch of issues. And I really thought that, I know, snickering, laughing, that's fine, I get it, and it's okay. You can laugh at me, and I have to, I'm removed enough from this now where I can kind of laugh at myself. And I was stuck with these two campers, and I couldn't fix them up the way that I thought I would be able to, or the way that I wanted to be able to. One of the campers had some mold issues, and we had just recently had found out at the time that Kyle was allergic. Everyone's allergic to mold to some degree, but he was more allergic than most people, one of the allergies that he has. And so I thought, well, I can't have him in this camper unless I completely gut it, completely spray everything, encapsulate it and everything. And I felt like I was stuck with these two campers in this situation, and I had no idea how I was going to be able to get out of it. I literally had no clue. So I decided to pray about it, right? Because, I probably should have done that in the first place, praying if this was the right way that God wanted me to go. And so I prayed about it, and through the course of a few events, I was able to sell both of them before we were to move to Massachusetts, and it ended up paying for our moving expenses. And God provided a way for me to get out of that situation. Imagine how frustrated Paul must have been in to not be able to do what God had called him to do, and not be able to see a resolution, to not be able to see that the work of Christ could continue to go on. The second issue that was going on with Paul is that people were talking about Jesus who knew Paul and know the message, but they didn't really mean it, right? They didn't believe in the message, and all they wanted to do was try to make more trouble for him, to cause him issues, to cause him anxiety. Many of these people are thought of not to necessarily people of a different Christian group. So it's not like, we had the Baptists kind of making fun of the Nazarenes, or the Pentecostals making fun of the Baptists, or something like that. It's not that, but rather pagans, people that didn't believe in God at all, didn't believe in Jesus, the redemptive power of Jesus dying on the cross for us, and they were just trying to cause trouble. And it's more likely that these pagans who heard about this Jesus, and so they knew about it to a degree that they heard it either in passing with people or in different community situations, and they knew about this Jesus person, right? They kind of knew maybe a book knowledge, but they didn't know a heart knowledge of who Jesus was. And they probably heard about it on the street where they were walking around and stuff like that. And they probably heard it, the gossip about Jesus, and kind of heard about the uproar that he was causing in the communities, and heard his message like that. Probably heard his message in those type of situations. They probably heard almost everything that there is really to know about Jesus during that time period. And they probably learned that Jesus had done really amazing things, and about the disciples and all the work that they had done. Now remember, back then everything was passed down through oral tradition, right? Families told different stories, and everything was passed down orally through telling it instead of writing everything down. Because the level of education back then, the way in which they taught things and things of that nature wasn't the greatest. Some people could read, right? Some people couldn't even do that at all. So most of the things had to be passed down through oral tradition, kind of talked the way through. And people talked, when people talked, when the parents talked, people listened. When people that had this oral tradition, when they knew the scriptures and they talked, people would listen. And they remember what was said and would pass it then down to the next people. And this is how people kind of knew about his ministry, knew about Jesus' ministry, and also knew about the ministry that Paul was trying to do, and that what he was called to do. The language that they used about Paul probably wasn't very edifying. It wasn't probably uplifting. The language that they used with or about Jesus probably wasn't uplifting or edifying in any way. They probably used language like, you wouldn't believe what I just heard, that this guy named Jesus, he did ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba. You wouldn't believe that I just heard that they turned, that these Jews, they killed their own king. Can you believe that they heard all these teachings and then a few years later they crucified him? Can you believe what happened? Can you believe that this just happened? And after hearing all of his teaching and sermons, they crucified him. Can you believe this? And they probably had conversations like that with a lot of people. And Paul's sitting in prison. Imagine Paul sitting in prison being like, come on. I mean, being so frustrated that he can't get out of prison to tell them anything. He probably says things like, come on, man, come on. He was being talked to like this. His Savior was being talked about like this. Very, very frustrating. And Paul, he could have tried to keep up his status. He might thought that people were thinking that he was a lunatic. Paul needed to, keep up his status. His image in the local community must have been smashed to pieces, totally shattered down. People thought that he was a nut job because of all the gossiping that was going on. What did Paul do? Well, we see it right here in the text. What did he do? He was grateful and he was fine that people were talking about Jesus. His status didn't matter. He didn't care. People were talking about Jesus. His position in the community didn't matter. He didn't care. People were talking about Jesus. His position in the jail didn't matter. He was grateful that people were talking about Jesus. His position in various Christian and non-Christian circles didn't matter because people were talking about Jesus. It didn't matter what they said as long as the gospel about Jesus' word was being talked about. All he cared about was that the gospel was being preached, that the word of Jesus was getting out. And he knew and had faith that the message that was being said, even though it was being said in a frustrating way, maybe in a negative way, that at least it was getting out and that Jesus was being talked about. This happens today as well. There are many times, atheists talk about the truth of Jesus in a mocking manner. Or maybe they try to disprove him. I have friends who are atheists, and they tend to do that on Facebook sometimes, and they try to egg me on and get me on to trip me up and say things. The gospel is being preached, and his word is moving, right? And his word will move regardless of who talks, which is just a really cool thing. Paul is grateful for the gospel being proclaimed. He's so grateful for the gospel being proclaimed. He's saying this to encourage the church that he loves so much. And we talked about that last week, that he loves the church at Philippi so much. And he's trying to encourage them. And how often are we tempted to feel discouraged because the plans that we had were badly thwarted? Or because malicious people were trying to make them difficult. We need to learn from Paul the art of seeing God's purpose working through our problems and difficulties. God meant it for good. The King is being announced, and we are going to celebrate. We will be happy and use every opportunity, whether good or bad, to spread the message of Jesus. To that end, would you pray with me? Father God, thank you so much for your word. Thank you so, so much for the amazing power that your word has. Thank you that you are not limited by man. Thank you that we cannot put you in a box and constrain you in any way, shape, or form. That whether good or bad things happen, you are there and your word will be preached and talked about. God, I pray that we might recognize that this day. Would you encourage us and equip us to do the amazing work that you have in store for us? And may we proclaim your word ever so boldly and know that whether it falls on rocky ground or fertile ground, your word is being preached and that seeds are being planted. God, thank you so much for your love for us. We ask all these things in Jesus' holy name. Amen.